Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike McCallan. I'm with Meetings Podcast and Grass Shack Events and Media Production Company. Trying to get in the virtual audience. How's that? Perfect? We had a speaker change this morning, which I just found out about 5 minutes ago, and so did Lynn. Instead of Anthony Allen, we have Lynn Randall. Lynn, and Lynn, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I am a strategic event consultant with Merritt's Travel, and I got the call last night. Is there a clicker to advance the... I'm one of those people. I tend to wander, so I apologize already to the virtual audience, and I'll try to stay in the light.
And Lynn, before you say anything, I wanted to say that I had a long list of things to say to you, but it's too long right now, so I want to get Lynn to get going. But the main thing is there's a hashtag for this room that you should use, so the virtual audience also should use. It is VES030W, and that's just in this room. So try and use that, ask questions, I'll relay them to Lynn, and then she can answer them. And also make sure you go over to, if you're in the room, make sure you go over to the microphone right over here to ask the questions. Any questions about that? No? Okay.
So, I hope that you woke up this morning feeling incredibly flexible about the kind of engagement that we're going to have and the kind of exchange that we're going to have. I got the call from Donna last night. I think everybody's aware of the weather issues, and the gentleman who was supposed to lead this session wasn't able to make his flight. And so it was about 10:30, and she said, can you run your session twice? So I have a session on Thursday that is actually really focused on content and presentations that engage. So in kind of the style that the music industry is adopting, I decided, why don't I do a mashup between these two topics, right? So I hope that that's all right with you. Again, I mentioned my name, Lynn Randall. My background is really in marketing and communications. I have also done some work in training, mostly selling, way back in the day, DVD training, interactive sort of, maybe some distance learning, a little bit of that. So right now, if we want to get the Twitter feed going for our virtual audience, and then also here in the room, who here in the room, are you all learning professionals of some variety or in charge of training for your companies? That's kind of the first, yes, 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 okay. And the rest of you, do you work for maybe third parties that are thinking about integrating virtual, or just trying to get a feel a bit for who we have in the room and what the topics of interest are going to be as much as possible, because I am probably going to have to rely on both the virtual audience with their Twitter contributions, and then also you guys to make sure that I'm delivering something that is meaningful and helpful to you. So, starting with the conversation around the content and delivery of content. If you think about it, training and also event presentations are all about transfer. So it is transfer of information, transfer of knowledge, transfer of enthusiasm and motivation. At the heart of it, what we do as professionals, either in the events industry but also in training and learning professions, is about transferring our belief. We want people to walk out of that session, event, or training and do something differently, think something differently, try something new, right? So there is, actually Daniel Pink, I'm very excited at luncheon today, and I saw his TED Talk. I feel like I can't wander. I want to move the table away, but I know I'm not dexterous enough to hang on the end here, but I don't know. It could be interesting, daredevil maneuver. But at any rate, several years ago, Daniel Pink did a TED Talk, which was fascinating to me. And part of what he said in that TED Talk really stuck. And that is that there is a disconnect between what science knows and business does. And I think we see that both in the presentation industry, but also in a lot of the ways that we train individuals as well. So truly understanding what happens in the brain to, there's a premise that I think somewhere along the line we forgot, or maybe it's something that we knew that we just, sort of ignore perhaps a bit. And that is the fact that we don't talk to something abstract. We don't talk to a role like an employee or a channel partner or perhaps a company, right? We talk to human beings. We talk to people. So to truly understand how to get our message across and make that transfer occur, we have to understand that piece of science and apply it to get business to do what we want business to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain and absorbing messages. That's a part of the mashup that is about the communications pieces. And then we'll talk very specifically about training, the learning cycle, and how to integrate that into a virtual platform to use for training. Let me ask another question of both the virtual audience and you here in the room. How many of you are already integrating virtual event technologies of some kind? Yes, 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 yes. Excellent. Good. Then you'll be very helpful to me when we get to that part of the conversation. And I'm hoping we can have, a bit of exchange, because I would love to hear some of the best practices and some of the things that you guys have learned about the human brain is that the human brain is incapable of processing complex information. You have to break it down into little tiny bits, and you have to allow the brain time to absorb this information. So too much, it's, that door to the brain is not going to swing open and the information's not going to get in. So that's one piece. And you think about a lot of the slides that you see that in business people use, and even in training, there are these complicated graphs that animate and move all over the place. The brain is not going to be able to absorb that. It has to be less complex, simple, and broken down into smaller bits and smaller sets. Second principle, proven fact, is that of all the senses, sight is the most powerful. So sight trumps any other sense that there is. And if you think about it, vision is kind of what our memory is made up of pictures. If you think about your first, what's like your first memory, your earliest memory, people will ask you that. Doesn't a little movie play in your head about that? About what your earliest memory? I'll tell you what mine was. My great-great-grandmother had this ring that she wanted to leave to me. And I was probably 5 or 6 years old. And she lived in this old house in rural mid-Missouri. And we were over at the house, and I have 3 brothers and my dad, and they were all in the other room watching football. And I went into her bedroom because she was, invalid at that time. I remember so clearly the cut glass water pitcher that sat on her bedside. I remember the bottles that were the pill bottles. And she pulled me over to her bedside, and she kind of smelled funny. I mean, I was 5 or 6, but somewhere in my memory, I remember this. And she said, I want you to go in the other room and get in the top drawer, there's a little box, and climb up and get that. And my brothers wouldn't help me, so I had to pull a chair over, and I climbed up on top of the chair, pulled out the drawer, and I got this box down, and it was her engagement ring. And I remember that to this 40 years later. I remember that very vividly, but it's a movie. And I'm sure that the same sorts of things are true when you think back on your earliest memory. So that is why these visuals are so powerful in getting your message through and into your brain to stick in your brain. In fact, there have been a number of studies about this. How many people are familiar with this statistic? Yeah, exactly. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. These are scientific facts that we've known for such a long time, and yet people aren't really deploying them and using them. If you hear a piece of information, I tell you something, and I don't have anything supporting it, I'm just talking to you, we're having a conversation. 3 days later, you'll remember 10% of what I've said. Now, if I put some sort of a relevant visual, something that creates that picture in your mind, 3 days later, you will remember 65% of what I've said. So for learning, training professionals, that's kind of an important fact. If you really want to give people information that they are going to act on and use moving forward, you have to deliver that training material in a different way that works with how the human brain absorbs information. So why? Why is this so? Well, our evolutionary past, right? So caveman days, people would look at an input of some kind, and they would absorb it visually, right? They'd look at it and they'd say, okay, now, can I eat that? Do I fight it? Is it going to come at me and attack me? Or can I mate with it? So those were kind of the three. Eat, fight, mate. And that helped us evolve safely. That is why the power of sight is so much more powerful than any of our other senses. And in fact, the reality is that we don't have to have everything written out on a slide. We don't have to have the type on it, etc. If you have a visual that's powerful enough, people will get it. I mean, I know, I don't speak that language. Not really sure what language that is, but I don't speak that language. But I do know that I don't want that to happen to me, so I'm not going to step around. It's probably quicksand, right? So we don't have to have absolutely everything there. Our brains will fill in the gaps for us. And those patterns can be used as another way to help promote what you're trying to train people about. So use those patterns as you're developing your training and your promotions. The other thing is novelty. So, you know, dog driving a car. That doesn't happen to be my dog, but dog driving a car, kind of novel, etc. Novelty wakes the brain up. So you pay attention to it. The other thing is humor, and I attempted humor, so that's a little closer to probably like mild amusement, but you know, hopefully don't worry, it'll work as well. The other piece is, and it relates to, you know, that story that I told you about my first memory? That's an emotional story. So that hits you on an emotional level. For years, business has felt like everything has to be rational. Everything has to be logical, and you won't get your point across unless you're very rational and you have a logical, lots of data, etc. Not true. The emotional and rational functions in your brain are separate, but they interact together, and they're far more powerful when they interact together. So emotion feeds creating those memories. And I will tell you, there is a huge trend and a huge movement right now, especially in the event space. I'd be interested in those of you, again, on the Twitter feed, but also here in the room. How many of you are hearing about IQ or, you know, adding some sort of emotional elements into the training? Is that a big thing with mostly training and certification? Is the whole emotional piece, IQ, how to engage emotionally, is that part of what's playing right now in what you're hearing? Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're certainly seeing it, absolutely, in business in general, but specifically in the event space. There is a book that's coming out. Guy Kawasaki is putting a book out in March that's called Enchantment, The Art of Winning Hearts, Minds, and Actions. So getting people to change. And it's all about that principle. It's this principle of you cannot just have this rational data information, you know, being pummeled at people. You have to connect also with them in some sort of way emotionally. So create some sort of emotion in the crowd. And I'll tell you a little bit about why this is. And this, again, these are slides for a different session. So for those of you who joined a little bit late, the speaker didn't make it, so we're doing a little mashup of my session that we'll be playing on Thursday about content and then also training. But, so when you have a live event, there is something in the room that happens, right? There is, like, for example, and this is kind of a cheap trick, but I'm going to ask you to do it anyway. Give me some applause, you guys here in the room. Virtually, I don't know, you could applaud. That would be great. Okay, now, first of all, I feel way better. And secondly, there's something that just happened in all of your brains here in the room that may not have happened for those of you that are watching just from your computers at home. That is that everything that enters our body to get to our brain comes in through one of our senses: sight, smell, touch, sound, vision. And what happens is it is an electrical impulse. So the energy of the crowd, what we just heard, that clapping, that activity, that energy that came in through our ears, the tactile sensation of your hands hitting each other, all of those were multiple sensations that entered the brain as electrical impulses, came through your body cell to cell, and worked its way up into your spinal cord. And the first thing that happens with every sensation, everything, is it goes through your emotional center, which is right in the middle of your brain, and then it gets to the frontal lobe first. So everything that you think about, you first experience emotionally. It's the first thing that hits you. So we need to use that as well. So my first question for both Twitter and then here in the room, I don't know if there's a good way to travel a mic around, but is there anything else? What does science know that business isn't currently doing in planning? I say content delivery here, but maybe it's training. Are any of you, do you have any best practices, anything that you can share in terms of something that science knows that may not be widely acted upon yet by business? And Mike, if there's anything that comes in on the Twitter feed that's interesting, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, there isn't anything right now, but I can turn this mic around too.
Anybody? Yeah, sure.
Hi.
Right over here.
I would keep it short. Depending on the topic, we recommend 20 minutes for an online event, no longer than an hour. Keep it as interactive as possible. Create moments every 5 or 10 minutes where people have to engage and use their brain and click.
Exactly right, exactly right. Every human brain loses attention between the 7 and 10 minute mark. So that means that what we have to do is exactly what you just described. That's a great best practice. And that is tell an emotionally relevant story. Okay, my story, I thought it was emotional, but hopefully relevant as well. Ask a question. Make them do something active. I've had sessions where I make people meet someone new, whether that is online, using social media, or in the room. So every 7 to 10 minutes, engage with them in a different way to wake up the brain. Anyone else? That was a great one. Back in the mic, back in the back.
There's also a microphone right here too, if you want to run up.
Oh, yeah, well,
but what I could. I'm on my way anyway.
I want to follow the rules and not ignore the people online. So what I'm wondering is the aspects of sort of content creation for events are now, when you're doing an event online, they're split much more between the host of the event and the actual speakers. Have you found any resources to help train speakers, I guess, better to present for an online audience?
That is a big challenge, actually. And there is, and it's not like, I swear he is not a shill. I did not place him there, but I actually have conducted that sort of training to help speakers understand, number one, content delivery. So all the things we're talking about, the visual, add polling and feedback, et cetera. Don't forget your virtual audience, integrate them using mobile technologies, et cetera, and worked as an individual coach with people on those sessions. And I've actually delivered a fair amount of them even virtually, so that the training itself is delivered virtually. I haven't come across anything that is prepackaged out there yet. So mostly it's that one-on-one or individualized type of training. And I do have a case study, and I think I took it out of this, but I'll talk through it in the Thursday session, about working with a very large healthcare company who took their, it was a large event that helped to train researchers, frontline healthcare workers, et cetera, to do exactly that. So how to help them learn these tricks of the trade and then develop their content very differently.
There are certifications out there for online trainers to, I don't know if anybody else has used it, and I'm certified, but I forget the name of the exact name of the certification.
See, they didn't make you do something active afterwards,
Yeah.
so it didn't stick in your brain.
But there is certification. I work for a company. We paid. We were all certified, and then from there we created our own version, and we've created something called Trainer Essentials.
Perfect.
And it teaches our online presenters how to be effective online presenters.
Excellent. And have you found, or have you done any studies about, how do they feel about it afterwards? How effective was it?
The trainers feel great.
Did they?
It's training in front of a computer versus training in front of a classroom where you can get visual stimulus and feedback is very different.
Huge difference.
So
Huge
the
difference.
trainers feel great about it. We always get positive feedback for virtual training. Anything that keeps people off airplanes, they're happy for it. Our metrics in terms of how people, we do a lot of testing, how they've scored on tests is exactly the same as a face-to-face event.
So it's the efficacy is the same. The effectiveness of that training is exactly the same. That's awesome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit specifically about training, and I'm going to do a little more brain science because that's the kind of nerd that I am, and then I will very specifically get into exactly then how you use that in design and in the design process also for a specific type of training, and then I'll integrate a bit of hybrid in that. So that's where I'm headed next. So two little other pieces, the internet and the brain. There have been a number of studies that have recently come out, and there actually was an article in the New York Times, I think, within the past month, and also Harvard Business Review about the study that's been done about they call it the Google effect on the brain. So we know that the brain, we used to think that the brain was set. So you got to a certain age and the brain was set and you weren't going to change it. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? That is not true. That's a fallacy that science learned that I think business has not yet adopted. The reality is they've now done studies on the fact that what we do is we go out and we search. So we have changed the way that we seek information. We don't go deep down and deep dive into a certain topic as much anymore at all, because all we have to do is Google it. That has changed the way that our brains function. This internet Google effect has rewired our brains. So our brains are different now than they used to be because of this Google effect on the brain. And I've got some references if anyone's kind of interested in how all of this works, but it's particularly relevant for trainers and people that are working in delivery using virtual technologies, et cetera. But the process is essentially the same. So at the core, the brain doesn't change, but the wiring can be plastic and adapt and change a bit. So at the core, we talked about how these inputs enter the body, and the first phase of the learning cycle is gathering. So your sight, your ears, all of this stuff comes in. Today, you're gathering this information, your best practices that you're sharing, et cetera. So then what will happen is you enter this very passive, you can't okay, I'm going to think about this while I sleep tonight. It's actually sleeping on it. So not active, but this passive time of reflection on whatever it was that you gathered. It then moves up closer to the front of the brain is where this process occurs, and you make your own connections. So, oh yeah, that thing that she said about the internet and people skimming over, I think that I could use that in my training, because what I'll do is I'll deliver information in a bunch of different ways and people can go out and they can seek it and so you start to make your own connections, and that's that process of creating. From there, the final step, and by the way, if this final step is skipped, then it never gets into your long-term memory, it goes away. So this final step is that you have to do something active with the information. So it moves into your motor cortex, and that means writing something about it, writing in a blog, tweeting, talking to each other, that's active, having conversations with other people, so teaching them about this information, or role-playing. All of those sorts of things help to complete the cycle, and so that is when learning occurs. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us as education, training professionals, and certification, et cetera, but also in the events industry? Start with gather, right? So you have one-way messaging. There's something that you want people to know. Send that out. Then they have this passive period of reflection, just exactly what we just talked about, and testing. And I'll tell you a very specific example of design of a session that incorporated and intentionally used this understanding of how the learning cycle works in the brain. There were a series of videos. It wasn't just videos, there were some PDFs and other documents that the attendees or the people that were participating in this particular training needed to consume first. Then there was a physical component. So all of this required video happened using a virtual technology. Then they moved into on site, when they were physically gathered together, there was leaders making their live presentations, and then group discussions and action plans. A better way, I think, to do that was actually to take that required video and have them watch that, and the first two parts of the cycle would occur because naturally people are going to have some passive period of time where they're reflecting and they're sleeping about things. Then when it moved into the create part of the cycle, that session leader wasn't just presenting at people, but they were getting them to engage as well and become part of that conversation, so that live presentation was really a lot more interactive. And in this particular case, this is one of the clients of mine that's in the high-tech industry. So this was helping them to understand what the vision for the company was and then make it active for their day-to-day jobs. So their group discussion and action plans. They knew they were going to have to take this information and use it in their day-to-day jobs, and they would be tested on it, and they were going to be checked, and it was part of their evaluation, et cetera. So there was that component to it as well. But that, really worked well in terms of, call it 3 months in advance. You conduct this training virtually. A number of different technologies that have great potential, and that is the virtual event platforms. You'll see a number of them out in the exhibit floor. There are web collaboration tools like Microsoft Live Meeting, WebEx, GoToMeeting, all of those sorts of collaboration tools. You can schedule time, but also have this training occur using any one of those tools. And then 2 weeks prior, you bring everybody in and you say, okay, you looked at this information, you've reflected on it, what questions do you have? What do you think isn't making sense to you? What would you change? And you have an actual live exchange. This can also be done virtually. So using, again, all of the tools that I just mentioned allow two-way back and forth. So people can be chatting, tweeting, putting information, as a collaborative exchange. And then also you can have video chats, et cetera. So allowing them to really engage with your subject matter experts before you get together in a physical gathering. And then when you're together, you really do what physical gatherings do best. And that is allow for people to network, exchange, say, hey, I was working through this stuff and my client's not going to go for this. This is ridiculous. What are you doing? And you have that sharing of best practices. You're learning from other people and gaining more of that physical benefit of the physical exchange. And then afterwards, information, testing, online, 24 hours, because that's the other, for the information to get through, you have to repeat it. So repeat in 24 hours, repeat again 2 weeks after, possibly with more of the live exchange. So here, look, I've taken this information, I've used it. This is what happened. Now what am I supposed to do? These are the challenges that I ran into with whether it's new product training or whatever the certification or training happens to be. And then once a quarter. The other benefit to these virtual platforms for certification, for things like, I know in the pharma industry, there are federal regulations around things like investigator meetings, et cetera. And you have to know that, number one, they watched every piece of what they were supposed to, that they are, using the information. You have so much information at your disposal using any of these virtual event technologies and tools so that you can report back on the things that are required in terms of certification. Also using these engagement tools that are part of the platform itself. So ensuring that people are asking questions, that they're, every 15 minutes or so. You can actually tell on some of these. I've said this in sessions before and people got that big brothery feeling. But you can tell if people have it as a primary screen or not. So you can actually outbound say, hey, I know that you are not watching this as your primary screen. I'm asking you a question, just like a teacher in class calling on someone who's, playing with their BlackBerry or whatever. Of course, in this particular session, you're totally allowed to be on your smartphones and tweet and do all of that. So that would not be my cue as to whether or not you were really listening. So at this point, I again want to sort of open it up. I'm not sure. We're probably pretty good on time, I think. Yeah. So I want to definitely open it up because I feel like, I talked a lot about stuff that may not be quite as relevant. Would love to hear stories about people who are successfully using virtual platforms in their training, maybe have some challenges, something that you would want to have the group help you solve, or, maybe there's brain science that can help answer, why do people do this? This is irritating. Why do people do X, Y, Z? Because really, again, it's not abstract. What we're trying to do is drive people to do different things for our business to be successful. Because really, people as individuals are relatively unlimited in terms of their potential. And our industry is the thing that can unleash that if we engage with them appropriately. So at this point, if you have anything in from Twitter, or I can also, I don't know, that's actually not a wireless.
I have a lot of questions of people trying to figure out how to use Twitter with what I'm getting.
Is that, seriously?
Yeah, it's like,
they
how
need
do I get on
training.
here? But,
they need some online training for that Twitter, right?
Yeah, perfect.
Have you used other mobile applications or Twitter in any of the training that you're doing right now? No? No? It's perfect for that. However, that's part of the instruction sheet that you were supposed to read off.
Oh, was I?
in the very beginning, I believe so.
There's a long list of stuff.
There's a big list, but you know.
What did you want me to read? I'm sorry.
I thought that there was instruction on using the Twitter.
Yeah, well, it said to use the hashtag, is all it said. So, so it's,
the hashtag. And the hashtag for this particular room is hashtag VES030W. And then that'll get to just this room, and we'll know that you're asking questions or responding to something that we said. Let me ask you, since this was a bait and switch, total bait and switch on you guys, what were you hoping to hear? What was it that you really wanted to when you came into this session? What were the things that were challenges that you were hoping to hear or have addressed? Can I call on you? You seemed thoughtful, so I thought, let's start to pass. Now I'm gonna do that thing that everyone hates, and the teacher's gonna call on the classroom. It's like, darn it, why didn't I watch this virtually? This young lady right here.
I also have a question about it too. Is like, do you have a lot of pushback from people that you're pushing to do virtual stuff? Because it seems like
absolutely.
It seems like people don't really want to do it because they don't understand.
There's a lot of fear.
Trying to get people to do more interesting things in events anyway. Besides the same old thing, it's really kind of. Do you get a lot of pushback from clients then?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and you know, you can't force people to take on some sort of a new innovation or a new change if there is not something that is driving them to do that. So one of the things that we mentioned was the snowstorm. Last year when that volcano erupted and people couldn't travel, there was a huge spike in the use of virtual events because something else was forcing them to use it. And what, you know, my belief is that those pressures will increase. There's the pressure to save cost, which was mentioned, I think, in the description even on this session. There is the pressure to, a lot of companies or associations or organizations are globalizing. So you want to be able to reach more of your people that may not be able to come in and attend. You've got people who say, you know what, my 8 hours of the day are full. So the only time I have are weekends or evenings. Those pressures are not going away. They're going to continue. They're going to become more. I also have clients that have bosses that like shiny objects. I don't know if you have any bosses or anyone in your organization that likes the shiny object. And they will start to force this upon us to start to integrate and use these kinds of technologies, in particular for training, because training budgets are one of the, along with events, are one of the first things really to get cut and crunched. And this is an option to help with that, but it's also an option to help make it more impactful. And I think that I'm hoping that that came through in the way that I was talking about the examples, because I believe it is incumbent upon us to be the drivers and consultants, because if it's just, oh, there was a rainstorm or snowstorm and people couldn't make it, or this volcano erupted, it's very last minute, it's not strategic, we're not thinking it all the way through. So we need to start to say, all right, look, here's my powerful business case on this. We want to save cost, we want to make this go, etc. That's what should drive why versus trying to force fit something in afterwards. Oh, do we have, actually?
I don't have the mic, but...
Oh. Sorry, now you see that was my fault for picking on you, I'm sorry.
I haven't walked enough this week, so it's good to be able to...
Yeah, right.
If I'm talking too much, you can tell me to stop.
No,
but,
I'm fine.
I missed a big driver for virtual learning. I work in pharma. We're a very highly regulated industry.
Yep.
And the consistency of message is a real driver for us, because we know that if we're training 2,500 people on a particular disease state or competitive information, we can tell you that the presentation has been approved, and everybody is getting the same exact message. So if somebody falls out of compliance, you can't say it wasn't because they were trained properly. They were trained properly. So consistency of message is a big driver for us.
Actually, and that's true, I think, all across pharma, is that you almost have to like guarantee that everybody got that same message in the same way. There are other very highly regulated industries, financials, that very much the same way. So anyone in the financial industry is going to be driven back. Now you're ready. See, I knew you'd be ready if I pointed at it.
Well, I guess the reason I was here is, I work for the Computing Tech Industry Association, so we actually do a CXO level conference for IT training companies, and we actually have a session called Hot New Technologies in Testing and Learning Technologies, or Hot New Trends, and I was actually here just to see if what what you all thought some of the hot latest technologies are. I mean, that was the title of the event. You were asking why we were here.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to see if there's something that we're missing that we're not covering at our sessions at our conference.
Well, and actually, Mike, is there something that you may have seen, because, you know, part of what Mike does is a podcast about these sorts of technologies and meetings.
Yeah, and of course I was reading the Twitter feeds. I didn't even hear what you said, which is horrible.
Oh, new trends, new hot technologies, things that people are using.
That's what's great about over here in the, what's it called?
It's the Expo Hall.
The Expo Hall. There's so many cool things that are all in one place, which is so great, because you know how it is. We're seeing all this stuff. But that's really, myself, I've used a company called Sonic Foundry before, and they're fantastic.
You've used them?
Yeah. Do you use them? Yeah.
MediaSite. Oh, excellent. Yeah, MediaSite is the Sonic Foundry web server.
Right. Actually, Lynn, I have a question for you from Rich Assay.
So I'll just close out and then we'll go to that one. But I do encourage actually everyone online to go to the virtual Expo Hall, and then also over next door. Sonic Foundry came from an education background, so it really is very well suited to understanding the needs specific of training, et cetera. There are other types of technologies, so you know, really when you go in looking specifically for what are the new tools, et cetera. I also would, no one here is currently incorporating mobile into any of the stuff that you're doing, or it looked like it, maybe some of the people online are. But that is going to be an increasing trend. Everything's driving to mobile. I mean, even when you look at societal trends, innovations with phones, et cetera, everything's driving to mobile. So that is something that I would definitely encourage people to start to explore, is how do I start to integrate mobile technologies, not just for engagement, but actually as the whole tool itself for delivery of your training. Because you know, if you have sales training, your salespeople are likely on the road. You know, people are mobile constantly, and you have iPads. You have much better technologies that are mobile in nature but large enough to be able to use. So anyway, Mike.
Rich Assay asks, seems like the economy should have made virtual more relevant, but it does not seem like it has really taken off. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that if you look at the trends information, certainly that came out of this industry, everybody was predicting this just hockey stick takeoff of this technology. And I think there's a combination of factors in terms of why that hasn't happened. In some cases, as people have entered the space, it is possible that the use of these technologies may have come in through IT and not through the meeting side, which means that people were not really focused on the attendee aspect of the experience. They were worried about security, they were worried about bandwidth issues, they were worried about, you know, things that were not relevant to being effective in achieving the goals that you wanted to. I also think that the events industry, and maybe it's true also of the training industry, was fearful. Everybody was afraid that their jobs would go away. So with the economy, there was a lot of fighting for here's why face-to-face needs to continue, versus really looking at this as something that, once again, isn't going to go away. It's absolutely not going to go away. So how do I integrate it and embrace it with my physical so that, you know, it's not threatening me if I use it appropriately? And so I think that fear that it's coming in through IT, it may be forced down from the top, all of those factors influence the fact that it didn't take off as much. And also, I think that people learned that it wasn't free. So I talked to a number of C-level clients that had these senior executives were like, well, we're going to go virtual because that's free. That's fallacy. It's absolutely not free. And in fact, it's way more complex because you're marrying what we understand from training industry and events industry with a technology. So it's kind of two things together in one, and it's very complex. And once they learned that, it's like, oh, I don't know. So a lot of people had bad experiences very early on, and that turned them off to it. So I think those are some of the factors. Any other thoughts on why it may not have had the hockey stick? Actually, we have. Do you want me to? Oh, I can't run around. Darn it, because you guys can't see me if I do that. I feel so planted. I'm a walker, and I feel so stuck.
My question along that line is, we're always people are coming to me wanting to try something new and shiny, like you said.
Yep.
But it's figuring out the return on investment before you actually do it, because, like you said, it's expensive. Look, all the equipment here, and then you don't know till afterwards how many people really participate. So I'd be interested to see if other people have challenges with that.
Is that a response to that, or yeah? Go ahead. Yeah, and then I'll chat.
A disclaimer, I originally come with about 15 years in the academic world, where we started with distance learning, began incorporating virtual environments about 10 years ago.
You should be up here.
No. Thursday morning, 8 o'clock.
There we go. All right, there we go.
But addressing that, I think there's a couple of things. There are so many rumors about the virtual environment, and the risks, the threats, IP rights, and all that stuff.
Yep.
90% of which, from our experience, are wonderful mythologies. Any instance we've found of somebody having a security problem in our 6 years full-time in the virtual environment has because somebody in-house made a mistake and left a door open. In every instance.
It's that unlimited potential of your people, right?
We all and we've all left home. Did I turn that off or not? But the risks are always make the press, and the hype is there. The other thing I think that's kept the hockey stick thing from happening is, as exciting as it is in the room next door, and I'm really eager to get in there, when you come out, you go, oh my God, where do I really start?
And how do I apply it? How do I make it real?
And so many numbers. The recommendation we work with is there are ways you can get started for nothing. There are environments that may not at all be what you're after. An environment like Second Life, and I don't work for Second Life at all. You can get in there for free and slop around and find people to help and just find out, do we like this at all? And if not, cool, and then go. But I think there's two things, the rumors, the risks, and just the confusion. The other thing, and I'll go quick, the other thing I wanted to address, two things you said. One is about preparing presenters.
Yes.
We did that starting with distance ed, preparing faculty. And what we've done over the years, we do it now. The last 2 years we've been in the business environment. We've developed a 12-week course, and I'm not selling that. That's not the point. But the goal is, we've found that for a presenter to really shine, they need to be a resident of that environment rather than a tourist.
Absolutely.
And so we want them to spend some extended time so they're comfortable, and if an idea comes up, they kind of know how to take advantage of it. Last thing I'll throw in your 4 points of how learning happens.
The learning cycle.
The scariest part of that we're seeing in the latest research is in that fourth step, where we talk and we rehearse and so forth. What we're finding now in the current research is, once we've experienced something, we've found meaning in it, we've got it in short-term or working memory, actually getting it into where it's a learned state takes years, and it takes a lot of repetition. And every time you repeat it, this is what scares the heck out of me, is every time you repeat it, the brain recreates it as if it's the first time it's experienced it. And if you don't create a new meaning, it's thrown away.
Right,
so
or it
and
changes
practice,
it, right?
If we don't somehow tweak it into some new meaning, it gets thrown away. And I think of all the 360 trainings I've sat in every year and wondering why I never remember that.
Well, right, and that's why, as I started to talk through the application, I said it's the one day and then come back again and then come back again, because that is that repetition, and making sure that you are embedding it in a way that they do remember it, and that they're, not changing it as they start to think about it. Going back to your question on ROI, I think that there are a couple of things to look at as you're trying to build your cases for these things. One of them is best practices of other companies. So going out and doing, actually the Virtual Edge site does a lot of really good there are blog posts. There are companies that you can talk to that have some best practice sort of information that can tell you a bit. And that's also why I asked you the question about, did you have data to back up the effectiveness of the training that you had done? I'm also working with a company right now who is looking at an enterprise-wide system to manage all of and it's training, but it's also events. And what I'm encouraging them to do to build their business case on this is to go out to their users. So there are groups of people within their organization that are currently running training or holding events, and they're everywhere, scattered throughout the organization. So do just a basic SurveyMonkey type survey that is a self-serve on the internet, and ask a series of questions. Are you doing them now? What are your biggest challenges? Is anyone helping you with conducting these? Are you replacing something that was physical with this? So that gets a bit to, you can back into your dollar figure. And then some other questions related to how much usage is occurring and what people are using, and then why they're using it. And then you can build your case around, people are out there using these things for not quite the right purpose. So their business goal is X, and this tool or whatever virtual technology that they're using is really better served for Y, and therefore we need to standardize around these 4 things. And companies are building tools like decision trees that help people work through. If you have a virtual training or virtual event, you can work through this decision tree, and that will help you get to what you need to be accomplishing. And then you can start to pull data from the pre-existing tools. But that's, before you're going out there, that's making an assumption that people are already doing something. And it's likely that people are, but they're not quite using it for the right purpose or in the right way. So that's kind of my suggestion. I don't know, does anybody else have any help in terms
Lynn,
of building your business case or ROI?
I think we've run out of time, sadly.
Darn it.
But I wanted to thank you very much for everything.
Sure,
for
I hope I
stepping
was
in.
an adequate stand-in, so I appreciate you guys jumping in and helping out and being involved. So thank you.
And I want to remind everybody to go down and check out the streaming studio and check out all the stuff they have in the trade show over there. It's really fantastic. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks.